She walked in at 6:52 a.m. carrying a canvas bag that had seen better days, and nobody looked twice. Nobody needed to. They'd already decided who she was before she reached the badge scanner. Another nurse, another body to fill a slot, another person who would learn her place before the week was out. What they didn't know would nearly kill a man before noon. Emily Carter had pulled a soldier's intestines back into his body cavity with her bare hands in a ditch outside of Kandahar, while small arms fire cracked through the air 6 feet above her head. She had cracked open a chest with field equipment in the back of a rattling MRAP at 2 a.m. and kept a heart beating with her fingers until they reached a forward surgical team. She had done things in the dark, in the mud, in the kind of cold that made your hands stop working, that most trauma surgeons in this building had only read about in case studies. But her badge said RN. And in this hospital, that was all that mattered. Redwood Regional Medical Center sat at the western edge of Millhaven, a mid-sized city that liked to call itself a medical hub without fully earning the title. The hospital had the equipment, the funding, the prestige architecture with glass and steel that caught the morning light in a way that made it look more important than it sometimes was. The ER was staffed by people who believed in hierarchy, the way some people believed in weather, as an immovable fact of nature, not something you questioned. Emily had transferred in from a county hospital 40 minutes north. Her file said 2 years post-military nursing degree, solid trauma background. It didn't say much else because she hadn't put much else in it. She wasn't the type to list what she'd done. She found her locker, changed into scrubs, and clipped her badge to her chest. 31 years old, 5'6", brown hair pulled back without ceremony. No makeup, no jewelry except a faded silicone wristband she never took off. She looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a nurse starting a shift. The charge nurse, a wide-shouldered man named Pete Gallagher, found her at the locker room door with a clipboard and the expression of someone who'd been doing this too long to be polite about it. "Carter." He didn't offer a hand. "I'll walk you through the unit. We move fast here. Don't expect anybody to slow down for you." "I won't," Emily said. "We've got 4 attendings on today. Dr. Harlan Voss runs trauma. He likes things done his way. You'll figure out pretty quick what that means." "Okay." Gallagher looked at her like he was waiting for a follow-up question. When none came, he turned and walked. She followed. The ER floor was already running. 2 traumas in the bay, a waiting room filling up, nurses threading between curtains with practiced efficiency. Emily took it in without comment. It wasn't so different from a forward operating base aid station, except cleaner and with better lighting, and nobody was shooting at anyone. Gallagher ran her through the station assignments with the speed of someone reading a grocery list. She absorbed it all without writing anything down, which seemed to bother him. "You want me to go slower?" "No," she said. "I've got it." He studied her for a moment, then moved on. She met Dr. Voss 40 minutes into the shift. He came through the trauma bay doors at 7:30 with the posture of a man who expected rooms to adjust for him, which this one generally did. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of lean that came from discipline rather than genetics. He had the hands of a surgeon and the mouth of someone who'd spent 30 years being told he was exceptional. The patient in Bay 2 was a 63-year-old male, chest pain, diaphoretic, BP running low and dropping. Emily had been managing him for the past 12 minutes while the attending got paged. She'd already run through the likely differentials in her head, pulled the card into position, flagged the echotech, and started a second line. Voss walked in, looked at the chart on the wall screen, and looked at the patient. He did not look at Emily. "What's his pressure?" 88/60 and falling, Emily said. "I'm thinking type A dissection. His pain presentation shifted from central chest to the back about 3 minutes ago, sharp quality, 9 out of 10. He's got a history of uncontrolled hypertension." Voss picked up the chart himself. "Read it. Set it down." "Who asked you?" The words landed flat in the air. The other nurse in the bay, a younger woman named Tanya, went very still. Emily kept her hands moving, adjusting the IV drip rate. "Nobody. I'm just telling you what I observed." "I'll determine the differential," Voss said. "Your job is to manage the lines and follow orders. That clear?" "Yes," she said. Voss ordered the standard ACS workup. Emily said nothing. She checked the echo tech's ETA, 4 minutes out, and kept watching the patient's color, which was doing something she didn't like. The echo came back and showed exactly what she'd said it would. The fellow reading it looked across the bay at Voss with the expression of someone delivering bad news to a person they respected too much to correct directly. Voss ordered the CT surgery consult without acknowledging it. He was already dialing his phone when he walked out. Tanya sidled up beside Emily and spoke very quietly. "You were right." "Doesn't matter," Emily said. "It kind of does." "It does for him." Emily nodded toward the patient. "Not for the other thing." Tanya watched her for a moment. "You're going to be interesting," she said, and went back to her charting. Whoa. The morning moved through its usual rhythms, a construction worker with a forearm laceration that needed ortho. A woman in her 40s with a syncopal episode that turned out to be dehydration and job stress, and a marriage she was tired of explaining. 3 pediatric cases back to back, which Emily handled efficiently enough that the attending, a young doctor named Rosario, actually said thank you when they finished. "You've done PEDs before," Rosario said. It wasn't quite a question. "Some. It shows. Most of the ER nurses here get itchy with kids. You didn't." Emily shrugged. "They're just smaller. Same rules apply." Rosario nodded slowly. She had the look of someone who was going to ask a follow-up question but thought better of it and went back to her notes. The real problem came at 10:15. Bay 3, a 27-year-old male named Marcus Webb, brought in by EMS following a high-speed MVA. He was conscious and combative, which was typical for TBI presentations, and his vitals were playing games, say, not bad enough to trigger the full trauma protocol, but not good enough to ignore. The attending on him was Dr. Conrad Stahl, a barrel-chested emergency physician who moved through the department like he was perpetually late for something and resented the fact. Emily picked up the Webb case when Stahl stepped out to take a trauma radio call. She reviewed the imaging on the wall screen, checked the neuro-obs that had been documented, and felt something tighten at the back of her neck. The kind of feeling she had learned in about 18 months of forward-deployed service not to dismiss. The first CT had been read as negative for hemorrhage, but the patient's left pupil was doing something subtle, not blown, not dramatically unequal, but tracking slower than the right by maybe half a second. Easy to miss if you weren't watching for it, concerning if you were. She pulled Stahl aside when he came back in. "Dr. Stahl, I want to flag something on Webb." Stahl looked at his watch first, then at her. "What?" "Left pupil's sluggish on my last 2 checks. Response time is off. I think we should consider a repeat CT." Stahl took the chart from her, looked at it with the speed of someone looking for a reason not to engage, and handed it back. First CT was clean. He's post-trauma. He's agitated. Sluggish pupils in an agitated patient are not automatically a red flag. "I understand that. I'm saying the trend over the last—" "What's your name?" She told him. "Emily." He said it the way people said things they didn't plan to remember. "I appreciate the input. The plan stands." He walked away. She stood for a moment looking at Marcus Webb, who had calmed down slightly and was staring at the ceiling with the unfocused gaze of someone whose brain was doing something it shouldn't be doing. She went back to his bedside, did the pupil check again herself, and looked at what she found. Left pupil, sluggish, a little more than before. She thought about Voss that morning. She thought about the word interesting and what it could cost her in this place if she kept pushing. She thought about a lot of things in a short amount of time. Then she pulled the curtain and went to find Rosario, because Rosario had said thank you, and that meant something. "I need a favor," Emily said. "Bay 3. Will you look at the pupils on Webb?" Rosario looked up from her laptop, read something in Emily's face, came with her. She did the assessment herself. Looked at Emily after, looked at the patient. "How long has it been trending?" 2 checks, 20 minutes apart. It's moving." Rosario turned around and walked out of the bay. Emily could hear her making a call. Stahl's voice rose in the hallway. Not the words, just the tone, which was the tone of someone who did not want to be told they'd made a call that was going to be second-guessed. The repeat CT was ordered. It showed a slow-developing epidural bleed, subtle, the kind that didn't show on the first scan because it hadn't expanded yet. The neurosurgery fellow who read it called down to the ER personally. Stahl appeared in the hallway outside Bay 3 17 minutes later, with the look of a man who was recalculating something in real time. He did not look at Emily. He spoke to Rosario. "Who flagged the pupil change?" Rosario said Emily's name. Stahl nodded once, said nothing, walked toward the nursing station. Tanya appeared at Emily's elbow. "He's going to hate you," she said cheerfully. "Probably," Emily said. "Webb's going to live." "That's the point." "I know. I'm just saying." Tanya tilted her head. "You want some coffee?" "You look like you haven't eaten." "I ate." "When?" Emily couldn't immediately answer that, which told her something. "Come on," Tanya said. 15 minutes. The attending rotation's covered. The break room was small and smelled like burnt coffee and someone's reheated fish from 3 shifts ago. Tanya filled 2 cups with the institutional coffee that Emily had learned to drink without preferences. They sat at the plastic table under the fluorescent light, and Emily ate half a granola bar from her bag. "Where were you before this?" Tanya asked. It was a casual question, the kind people asked. "County up north." "Before that?" Emily looked at her coffee. "Military." "Army?" "Yeah." Tanya nodded. She had the good sense not to push it. "Explain some things." "What things?" "The way you work. You don't flinch. Most people in this ER, something bad comes through the door, there's a half second where you can see them shift gears, right? Like they're adjusting. You don't do that. You're already in gear." Emily broke off another piece of granola bar. "You notice a lot. ER nurse for 9 years, you either learn to read people or you wash out." Tanya wrapped both hands around her cup. "The doctors here are going to make it hard for you. You know that, right?" "I figured." "Voss especially. He doesn't like being suggested to, and Stahl's the type to hold a grudge about the pupil thing even though you saved that kid's life." "I know." "You okay with that?" Emily thought about it for a genuine second, not a polite one. "I'm not here to be liked." "No," Tanya said, "but you might want a friend or two, just in case." She said it lightly enough that it could have been nothing, but she also didn't look away when she said it, and Emily filed that away in the part of her brain that kept track of who was real and who was performing. "Okay," Emily said. Tanya smiled at her coffee. "Okay." Batsampat. They were back on the floor at 11:40 when Gallagher appeared and told Emily that Dr. Voss wanted her in his office. She'd expected this. She had not expected it to come with Gallagher's expression, which was less "there's trouble" and more "something is being decided about you." Voss's office was off the main corridor, small and organized in the way that spoke of control rather than tidiness. He was behind his desk when she came in. There was a chair in front of the desk. He didn't indicate she should sit, so she didn't. He had a folder open. He was looking at it. "You've been here one morning," he said. "Yes." "In that time, you've suggested a differential ahead of an attending without being asked, and initiated contact with a separate physician to second-guess another attending's decision." She let that sit for a moment. "That's one way to describe it." His eyes came up. "Is there another way?" "I flagged a clinical observation that I thought was time-sensitive. Both times. And both times you went around the attending of record. The first time I told you directly. The second time I tried to tell Dr. Stahl directly, and he declined to—" "The second time," Voss said evenly, "you involved a colleague in a way that created friction within the team and undermined Dr. Stahl's management of his patient." She looked at him. "The patient had an epidural bleed." "The patient is being managed by neurosurgery. That's not the issue." "Then what is?" "The issue," Voss said, "is that this department functions on trust, and trust requires a certain kind of cooperation that is not demonstrated by a new nurse second-guessing attending physicians on her first shift." He closed the folder. "I want to be clear with you. This is not a performance review. It's a conversation, but it needs to happen only once." Emily kept her voice level. "Are you telling me to stop flagging observations I think are clinically significant? I'm telling you to route those observations through the appropriate chain of command." "I did." "The appropriate chain?" he repeated, slower. She understood what he meant. She understood it precisely. He meant stay quiet until the right person asks you. He meant don't be the one who's right in a way that makes others wrong. He meant the thing that people meant when they had the power to discipline and the inclination to use it. "I understand," she said. Voss studied her for a moment, looking for something, insubordination, maybe, or sarcasm, something he could point to. She gave him nothing. "Good," he said. "That's all." She walked back to the floor, feeling the familiar weight of it. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. Something that had accumulated across 2 deployments and a dozen engagements where she'd been the lowest-ranking person in the room with the clearest idea of what needed to happen. You learned to carry that weight a certain way. If you carried it wrong, it crushed you. Tanya was at the nursing station. She looked up, read Emily's face. "How bad?" "Not bad," Emily said. "Just clear." "He tell you to know your place?" In the language of hospital administration, yes. Tanya made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Welcome to Redwood Regional." She slid a chart across the counter. "Bay 7, 60-year-old with a laceration and a story about a fence that doesn't quite add up." Emily took the chart. "DV? Probably. Be gentle." She moved. The afternoon filled itself. That was the thing about ER nursing. The sheer volume of it kept personal problems from settling. By 2 o'clock, Emily had managed 7 patients independently, assisted on 2 more, watched Stahl handle a respiratory case with competence that she acknowledged privately and kept to herself, and eaten the other half of the granola bar standing up beside a supply cart. At 2:47, Gallagher appeared in the bay where she was completing discharge instructions for a teenager with a sprained wrist, and his face had done something new. "Carter." The tone brought her head up. "Incoming trauma. Multiple. ETA 6 minutes." He hesitated. She caught it, a fraction of a second, where Gallagher, who hesitated at nothing, hesitated. "They're coming from a convoy site. Military. There's—" He stopped. "There's a lot of personnel coming with them." "How many patients?" "2 critical, 1 priority. The priority is a special operations officer." He paused again. "They're asking who's on." She set down the discharge paperwork. "Who's asking?" Gallagher's expression was something she couldn't fully read. "Command personnel. They transmitted ahead. They want the trauma team prepped." He paused one more time. "They also ask specifically about nursing assignments." Emily looked at him. Nothing in her face moved. "Tell them what they asked," she said. "Who's on?" Gallagher nodded slowly and moved toward the comm station. Emily finished the discharge instructions for the teenager. She did not rush, did not abbreviate, made sure the kid understood the splinting instructions, and then she stripped her gloves and walked to the trauma bay to prep. The windows at the east end of the building started rattling at 2:53 p.m. She heard it before she saw it, the deep rotary thud of a military helicopter on the landing pad, a sound she hadn't heard in 2 years and which her body recognized before her brain fully processed it. Her hands kept moving over the cart, organizing the airway equipment, checking the laryngoscope blade, running through the inventory by feel. The radio at the charge station crackled. ETA 90 seconds. Priority patient is a penetrating blast injury. Right thorax, BP is 70 and dropping. He's been down for... The static cut out. Emily looked at the tray in front of her, looked at the bay, thought about the word dropping. Then the doors burst open, and they came in fast. The first thing she registered was the controlled chaos of the entry. A stretcher moving at speed, surrounded by people who moved with military precision, even in a hospital environment, which meant they were either security or operators, and the gear on their vests said operators. Full tactical kit, stripped down to essential carry, faces tight, eyes forward. The second thing she registered was the patient. A large man in his 40s, partial uniform, the right side of his chest wrapped in field dressings that were dark with through-and-through saturation. His color was terrible. His jaw was set in a way she recognized as a person fighting to stay conscious through the discipline of sheer will. The third thing she registered was the man who came through the door behind the stretcher. He was tall, late 50s, in dress uniform with the kind of bearing that didn't require rank insignia to announce itself. 3 stars on his shoulder, but she'd have known regardless. She knew his posture, she knew the particular way he held his hands, loose at his sides, ready, never quite at ease. His name was General Warren Ashby, and the last time she'd seen him, she had been 200 meters inside a hostile engagement zone, pulling his aide-de-camp out of a burning vehicle with her left arm because her right had taken around 12 minutes before. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. The cart she was gripping didn't move. She didn't move. The entire calculus of the afternoon, Voss in his office, Stahl's cold dismissal, Gallagher's careful tone, rearranged itself in the space between one heartbeat and the next. General Ashby stopped walking. Around him the room kept moving. Nurses, residents, the charge team converging on the critical patient, equipment being wheeled, orders being called. And in the middle of all of it, Warren Ashby stood completely still and looked at Emily Carter. Then he said her name. Not Nurse Carter, not ma'am, her rank, her name. The way you address someone you owed a debt to that you hadn't figured out how to repay. And every person in that trauma bay heard it. Staff Sergeant Carter. The words hit the room differently than any order that had been shouted in the last 90 seconds. Everything kept moving. Hands on the patient, monitors being attached, someone calling out the BP, but there was a layer underneath all of it that went very quiet. Ashby crossed the distance between them in 4 strides. He didn't offer a hand. He stopped in front of her and looked at her the way people looked at something they'd thought about in the abstract for a long time and were now seeing in 3 dimensions, and it was both exactly what they expected and nothing like what they expected. "General Ashby," she said. Her voice was level. She had a lot of practice making her voice level. "You're assigned here." "I am." He glanced around the bay, at Voss, who had appeared from somewhere and was now standing very still near the crash cart with the expression of a man recalibrating, and then back at her. "Good," he said. Just that. Then he turned toward the patient, and the window for whatever that moment was closed, and the room snapped back to full speed. The officer's name, she would learn in the next 40 seconds, was Colonel Daniel Merritt. 44 years old, 12 years in special operations, the kind of man whose service record was classified well above anything she'd be cleared to read in a civilian hospital. Right now he was none of those things. Right now he was a man losing blood at a rate that meant they had maybe 6 minutes to get ahead of it. "Right tension pneumo," she said, loud enough to carry. "Breath sounds absent on the right, tracheal deviation starting. He needs a needle before anything else." Voss looked at her. There was a half second. She felt it, where the morning played out in real time in his expression, the office, the folder, this is not a performance review. Then he looked at the patient and said, "Do it." She had the kit in her hands already. 14 gauge, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She'd done it in the dark. She'd done it through a glove with a cracked palm. She'd done it in the back of a vehicle that was actively taking fire. This was nothing. Her hands were steady and she was through the chest wall in the right position on the first pass, and the hiss of released air was the best sound in the room. Merritt's oxygen saturation, which had been dropping toward the 80s, began its climb. "BP's coming up," someone called. 74, 78. "He's still bleeding," Emily said. "That buys us time. It doesn't fix him. We need a thoracic surgeon in this room." Voss was already on the phone. She heard him say hemorrhagic and right thorax and his voice had lost the particular quality it carried when he was managing something, the smoothness of a person who believed the situation was under their control. Right now he sounded like a physician who was worried. That was better. Worried was accurate. The next 12 minutes were the kind that compressed time strangely. The perception of them afterward would be much shorter than the lived experience, which was granular and loud and full of small decisions made at speed. Emily managed the chest drain setup, while a resident named Okafor worked the second large-bore IV access. The thoracic surgeon, a compact woman named Dr. Fiona Marsh, who had the speed and economy of motion that came from 2 decades in OR, arrived at the 8-minute mark and took in the situation with a single visual sweep. "Good chest drain placement," she said, to no one in particular but looking at where Emily's hands were. "He's going to need the OR," Emily said. "Obviously. Is he stable enough to move?" "He's borderline. He needs another 4 minutes of resuscitation first." Marsh looked at her. The look wasn't hostile. It was the look of a person measuring the confidence behind a statement against the evidence in front of them. Then she looked at the monitors. 4 minutes, she said. Start the clock. The tactical personnel who had come in with Merritt had positioned themselves around the periphery of the bay in a way that wasn't aggressive but was absolutely present, blocking the exits casually, watching everything. One of them, a compact woman with sergeant's insignia and the flat eyes of someone who had seen enough that she'd stopped being surprised by things, kept her gaze on Emily for most of those 4 minutes. Not suspicious. Evaluating. General Ashby stood near the head of the bed. He wasn't in the way. He wasn't touching anything. He watched Merritt's face with the kind of controlled attention that was its own form of helplessness. The helplessness of someone who commanded things and could not command this. At the 2-minute mark, Merritt's eyes opened. Not fully. A crack. He found the ceiling, found nothing useful there, and then, with obvious effort, turned his head. He found Ashby first. Something passed between them that Emily didn't need to interpret. Then his eyes moved and found her, and they stayed. She was adjusting the drain output, not looking at him, and then she was looking at him because he hadn't looked away and she could feel it. "Hey," she said. Simple as that. His mouth moved. Almost no volume. She leaned in. "You're one of Warren's people," he said. "I was," she said. "Right now, I'm yours." Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. The kind of thing that happened when a person who had been holding a great deal of weight let a fraction of it down because someone credible was standing next to them. "Am I going to make it?" She looked at him directly. She had never believed in lying to patients about the category of what was happening to them, even in the field, even when the truth was hard. You owed people their own reality. "Your odds just got better," she said. "We're going to move you to surgery in about 2 minutes. Dr. Marsh is good. You focus on staying with me until we get there." He nodded, closed his eyes, stayed.
Masih di...
They moved him at the 4-minute mark, as promised. The procession to the OR was fast and complicated. The tactical personnel had opinions about transport protocols that required a brief, tense negotiation with Marsh in the elevator vestibule. Emily stood outside that conversation. It wasn't her jurisdiction. When the elevator doors closed with Merritt and the surgical team inside, the trauma bay felt suddenly different, quieter in the specific way spaces felt after something urgent had left them. Voss was at the nursing station. He had his back to her, which she thought at first was incidental, and then thought probably wasn't. Ashby was still in the bay. He'd stayed after the stretcher left, standing near the drain that had been disconnected and rolled aside, looking at the space where Merritt had been. Emily began the reset, breaking down used equipment, bagging disposables, clearing the cart for the next case. It was automatic work. She'd learned to use automatic work. "How long have you been here?" Ashby asked. She didn't stop moving. "This hospital? First shift." He made a sound that wasn't quite a response. "Why here?" he asked. "It was available." "Carter." She stopped, looked at him. "Why here?" he said again, and this time it was a different question. "Not this hospital, but this city, this work, this version of your life." She thought about it for a second longer than she needed to. "It's what I have a license for," she said. It wasn't the whole answer, and they both knew it. He didn't push. He had the good sense, which she'd always credited him with, to know when someone had drawn a line that wasn't about him. "The needle decompression," he said. "The drain. The call on the tension pneumo before anyone else was calling it." She didn't say anything. "Is anyone in this building aware of your background?" he asked. She went back to stripping the cart. "My file says ER nursing, 2 years post-military." "That's not what I asked." "No," she said. "Nobody here knows." Ashby was quiet for a moment. She could feel him deciding something. That was another thing she remembered about him. He made decisions slowly and then completely. There was no revisiting once he landed. "There are going to be questions," he said, "about why I knew your name, about what I called you." "I know. I won't lie if I'm asked directly." She looked at him. "I wouldn't ask you to." He nodded once. "Okay." She finished the cart reset and moved toward the hallway, and that was when Stahl appeared in the bay entrance. He looked at Ashby, because you couldn't not look at Ashby when Ashby was in the room. 3 stars, and that posture did something to civilian sightlines. Then he looked at Emily. Then he looked between them with the expression of a man who had walked into a conversation he hadn't been invited to and was deciding whether to care. Carter. His voice had lost the casual dismissal of the morning, replaced by something more careful. Good work on the chest. Who made the call on the pneumo? I did, she said. He nodded slowly. Voss signed off? He authorized the procedure. Another nod, slower. Right. He seemed to be searching for the appropriate register. Credit felt wrong to him. She could see that. But the alternative in front of a 3-star general was worse. Good catch, he managed. It cost him something. She didn't enjoy it. She just noted it. Thank you, she said, because she wasn't going to perform graciousness, and she wasn't going to perform satisfaction either. It was just the appropriate response to the appropriate thing. Stahl left. Tanya appeared from behind a supply cart where she had absolutely been listening and gave Emily a look that communicated several things simultaneously without a word. Emily shook her head very slightly. Later. The afternoon shifted. Ashby's presence in the department had effects that spread outward like pressure in water. The tactical personnel created a perimeter that wasn't a perimeter. The communications traffic through the charge desk increased, and the attending physicians moved with a self-consciousness that they weren't aware of, but that Emily noticed, because she was always watching the room. Voss pulled her aside at 4:15. Not his office this time. The corridor beside the supply room, which was more honest. This wasn't a formal conversation. It was an improvised one, and he'd been the one who had to improvise. The general knows you, Voss said. Yes. From your service. Yes. He was working up to something. She gave him the space to get there. He called you staff sergeant. That was my rank. Staff sergeants are... He paused. That's a combat rank. It can be. Were you deployed? She looked at him. She wasn't going to confirm or deny her service history to Harlan Voss in a hospital corridor, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she didn't owe it to him, and the distinction mattered. My record is what it is, Dr. Voss. What I did this afternoon I'd have done regardless. He processed that. The pneumo decompression. You've done that before. I've done a lot of things before. In the field. She said nothing. Voss put his hands in his coat pockets. He was recalculating. She could almost see the arithmetic of it, the morning's conversation rearranging itself in light of the afternoon. She had some sympathy for the position. He'd made a set of assumptions based on what her badge said, and they had been measurably wrong. And now he had to figure out what to do with that without it looking like what it was. The morning, he said. The dissection call. You made the right call, she said. CT surgery got there in time. Based on your differential. Based on the patient's presentation. He looked at her steadily. You're not going to make this easy. I'm not trying to make it anything, she said. I'm trying to do my job. He almost said something else. She could see it at the edge of his expression, something that might have been an acknowledgement or might have been closer to an apology, but he wasn't built for those, and she wasn't going to stand here waiting. Is that all? She asked. He let out a breath. For now. She went back to the floor. At 6:10, word came down from the OR. Merritt was out of surgery. Marsh had found and repaired a laceration to the lower lobe of the right lung and managed a significant hemothorax that would have killed him inside the hour without intervention. He was in recovery, intubated, stable. The OR team called it a successful outcome with the careful flatness of people who had seen enough bad outcomes to not celebrate too early. Emily was charting when Tanya put a hand briefly on her shoulder and said, He made it. She felt something release in her chest that she hadn't fully been aware of holding. Good, she said. Marsh is telling anyone who'll listen that the pre-op decompression and drain placement bought him the time he needed. Tanya paused. She wants to know who did it. She can ask Voss. He authorized it. Emily. She looked up. Tanya had the expression of someone trying to communicate something that the other person was deliberately not receiving. You saved that man's life. Marsh saved that man's life. You bought him the 6 minutes he needed to get to Marsh. Emily turned back to the chart. That's what the ER is for. Tanya made a frustrated sound that was also, underneath, something else. Something warmer. You are the most aggravating person I have met in 9 years of this job, she said, and I mean that as a genuine compliment. Emily almost smiled. She kept her eyes on the chart. The shift was supposed to end at 7. At 6:48, Pete Gallagher appeared at the nursing station with his clipboard and the expression that she was starting to recognize as his something is happening face, which was different from his something needs to happen face in a way she was still calibrating. Carter, conference room. Administration is asking for you. She looked up. Why? They didn't specify. He hesitated again. That hesitation she kept catching. General Ashby is already in there. She set down her pen. Also, Gallagher said, and his voice dropped slightly, Dr. Voss. And Dr. Stahl. He paused. And someone from hospital administration I've never seen before, which is the part that has me worried. Emily looked at him for a moment, looked at the chart she'd been completing. Thought about the morning and the afternoon and the way Voss had stood with his hands in his pockets trying to rewrite the math of what he'd done. Okay, she said. She followed Gallagher down the corridor toward the conference room, and through the glass panel in the door she could see Ashby standing at the far end of the table, not sitting, which meant he was not here as a guest. He was here as something else entirely. And when Voss saw her come through the door, his face did something she hadn't seen it do all day. He looked away first. The conference room at Redwood Regional had been designed for budget meetings and department reviews. A long table, padded chairs, a wall screen that perpetually displayed the hospital logo because nobody ever remembered to turn it off. It was a room built for the management of ordinary problems. What was sitting in it right now was not an ordinary problem. Emily took the chair nearest the door, not because she planned to leave, but because it was the one that gave her the fullest view of the room. Old habit. Gallagher sat 2 seats down with his clipboard on the table in front of him and the posture of someone who had decided to observe rather than participate. Ashby stood at the end of the table. She'd been right about that. He was standing in the way that meant he had chosen not to sit, which was itself a statement. Next to the wall screen, a Piet in a gray suit who had the bloodless quality of a hospital administrator was reviewing something on a tablet and not making eye contact with anyone, which meant he was either conflict-averse or he was the type who gathered information before engaging. She filed him as the latter. Voss was seated across from where she'd sat. Stahl was beside him. Both had the look of men who had been in this room long enough to know that the conversation that was coming was not going to go the way they'd assumed conversations like this went. The administrator set down his tablet. I'm Raymond Pruitt. I'm the VP of Operations here at Redwood Regional. He said it the way people said titles when they needed to establish that the title meant something. I appreciate everyone making time. Nobody said anything to that. I've been briefed on the events of today, Pruitt said. Both the clinical incident involving Colonel Merritt and some concerns that have been raised about the working environment in the emergency department. He cleared his throat. General Ashby reached out to my office directly at approximately 5:30. Voss's jaw moved. He didn't speak. I asked for this meeting, Ashby said. He said it simply, without the weight of command performance, which made it land heavier. Not to create a problem, to make sure one that already exists gets handled correctly. Pruitt looked at him with the expression of someone who had agreed to this meeting and was now sitting in it and realizing the full geometry of what he'd agreed to. General, Pruitt said carefully, I want to assure you that Redwood Regional takes any concerns about staff treatment very seriously. I don't need assurances, Ashby said. I was present in the emergency department this afternoon. I watched a nurse who spent 6 years as a combat medical specialist, who performed battlefield trauma procedures under live fire, who was twice commended for actions that saved the lives of multiple service members, get treated like she didn't know how to do her job, by people who had no basis for that conclusion other than the fact that she was new and she was a nurse and she was a woman. He paused. I need that to be on record. Not assured. The room was very quiet. Stahl's hand on the table had stopped moving. Voss was looking at the middle distance of the wall, which was his version of composure. Emily looked at Ashby. She hadn't known he was going to do this. She wasn't certain how she felt about it. The exposure of it, the sudden visibility after a lifetime of operating in the background. But she also recognized that this wasn't about her comfort, and she had the self-awareness to know that her discomfort with being seen was not the same thing as it being wrong. "Staff Sergeant Carter," Pruitt said, pivoting to her with the careful neutrality of someone who was recalibrating rapidly. "Can you walk me through your background?" She did. She kept it factual and brief. Enlistment at 21, combat medic training, 2 deployments, the specific role of trauma specialist attached to a special operations unit, the kind of procedures she'd been authorized and trained to perform in the field. She didn't editorialize. She didn't look at Voss while she talked. When she finished, Pruitt was quiet for a moment. "And you didn't disclose this to the department," he said. "My application was accurate. Post-military, nursing license, ER background. I didn't provide a detailed service record because I wasn't asked for one and it wasn't required." "No," Pruitt said slowly. "No, it wasn't." He looked at Voss. "Dr. Voss, this morning you had a conversation with Nurse Carter about, as I understand it, her clinical observations." Voss shifted. "I addressed some concerns about protocol and chain of command, yes. Can you be more specific?" A pause. She had made clinical suggestions ahead of and around the attending physicians. I wanted to make clear what the appropriate channels were for that kind of input. "You told her to stay in her lane," Ashby said. The directness of it made Stahl look up. "That's not," Voss started. "I'm paraphrasing, but is the paraphrase accurate?" Voss's mouth closed. He looked at the table. Pruitt turned a pen over in his hand. "Dr. Stahl, there was also a case involving a patient in Bay 3, a 27-year-old with a TBI." Stahl didn't react. He'd been expecting this. Nurse Carter flagged a concern about pupil response. "I assessed the patient and determined the presentation didn't warrant an immediate change in management." She then went to a separate physician to request a second look. She did. And the repeat imaging showed an epidural hematoma. "Yes." Flat, no elaboration, which would have, Pruitt glanced at a note, "killed the patient within 4 to 6 hours without surgical intervention, according to the neurosurgery fellow's documentation." The word "killed" sat in the room without anyone picking it up. "I want to be clear," Stahl said, "that clinical disagreements happen in an emergency department. The system worked. The patient got the care he needed. Because Nurse Carter went around you," Ashby said. "Because the team responded appropriately. Because she found someone who would listen when you wouldn't." Ashby's voice hadn't risen. That was the thing about him. He didn't need volume. She was right about the pneumothorax on Colonel Merritt before any physician in that room. She was right about the dissection this morning. She was right about the epidural bleed. And at every point she was treated as a problem rather than an asset. Stahl looked at him directly. It took something. "General, with respect, this is a clinical environment, and I don't think—" "With respect," Ashby said, "you almost let a 27-year-old man die today because you didn't like how the suggestion was delivered." Silence. Emily looked at her hands on the table. She wasn't going to enjoy this. She'd told herself that in the corridor, and she was holding to it. This wasn't satisfaction. This was a reckoning that she hadn't asked for, and that was happening anyway because of a set of decisions other people had made, and she was going to sit in it without performing either vindication or false modesty. Pruitt set down his pen. "I think we need to pause this conversation and continue it through the appropriate HR process, with documentation and, potentially, with legal counsel present." He looked at Emily. "Nurse Carter, I want to assure you that this hospital does not condone any form of discrimination or hostile work environment. I'll be personally overseeing—" The door opened. Not knocked. Opened. The tactical sergeant, the compact woman who'd been watching Emily in the trauma bay, leaned in and addressed Ashby without preamble. "Sir, Colonel Merritt is awake. He's asking for the nurse." The room pivoted on that sentence. Ashby looked at Emily. She looked at Pruitt. because Pruitt was the administrator and this was his building and she wasn't going to walk out of an administrative meeting without acknowledgement. Go, Pruitt said. She went. Patat. The ICU at Redwood Regional was on the 4th floor, removed from the ER's organized chaos by 2 elevators and a set of double doors that required badge access. The tactical personnel had established a presence in the corridor outside Merritt's room that wasn't obstructive but made the night shift nurses visibly tense. Merritt was extubated by the time she arrived, faster than she'd expected, which meant either his pulmonary function was better than anticipated, or Marsh had made a judgment call about comfort versus caution and gone toward comfort. He was propped at about 30 degrees, 2 chest tubes, supplemental oxygen, the gray-white color of someone who had lost a significant volume of blood and gotten it back imperfectly. He looked like he'd been hit by something large and fast, which was accurate. He looked more awake than she'd expected. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough from the tube. "Hey." She came to the side of the bed, looked at the monitors out of reflex. Heart rate 62, O2, Sat 96, BP 104/68, which was acceptable for the current status. "How's the pain?" "Managed." He meant it. He had the pain tolerance of someone who'd made a practice of not acknowledging pain until it interfered with function. "I remember you from the Bay." "I was there." "I remember the needle." He almost smiled. "That's the kind of thing you remember." "I imagine so." He studied her. He had dark eyes and the particular steadiness of someone who had been assessed for psychological fitness so many times that stillness had become involuntary. "Warren says I owe you." "Warren says a lot of things." "He's not wrong about most of them." He shifted slightly, winced, real, not performed, and resettled. "What was it, tension pneumo?" "Yes, right side. Your field dressings were solid, but they'd sealed the chest wall too well." He processed this with the matter-of-fact quality of a man hearing a clinical explanation of his own near-death. "And the surgery?" "Dr. Marsh repaired a pulmonary laceration and evacuated the hemothorax. You had about a liter of blood in the right pleural space." He absorbed that. "Good outcome." "Better than the alternative." He made a sound that was something between a laugh and a cough, and immediately regretted it. She handed him the water cup from the side table without being asked. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it for more than the water. She didn't deflect it. She'd learned that deflecting gratitude was its own kind of performance. "You're welcome," she said, and let it be that. They were quiet for a moment. Through the glass, she could see Ashby speaking with one of the tactical personnel in the corridor. "He's going to do something," Merritt said. He was watching through the glass, too. "I know." "Does it bother you?" She thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. "What happened this morning bothers me," she said. "Not because I need anyone to fix it. Because a patient almost died due to it, and that's the only part that actually matters." Merritt looked at her. "You're not going to ask him to stand down?" "No." "Why not?" "Because he's not wrong," she said simply. "I just don't want it done for me. I want it done correctly." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the same thing, from where I'm sitting." "Maybe." He leaned his head back and looked at the ceiling. "I've known Warren Ashby for 19 years. He is not a man who does things for reasons that aren't good ones." His eyes came back to her. "Whatever's happening in that hospital, he's not doing it to make himself feel better about finding you here. He's doing it because it needs doing." She didn't answer that. She checked his drain output on the collection chamber. The volume was appropriate, serosanguinous, consistent with expected post-op output. She noted it on the intake form. "Get some sleep," she said. "Your body's burned through everything it had." "Yes, Staff Sergeant," he said, and there was something in it. Not mockery, something almost fond. She left him there and went back to the corridor and found Ashby waiting. They stood near the window at the end of the ICU corridor, which looked out over the parking structure and the gray Millhaven dusk settling over the roofline. She had 40 minutes left on her shift, which had already run over by a significant margin and which she was going to complete regardless. "What happened in there after I left?" she asked. "Pruitt opened an HR investigation. He called someone from legal before I was out of the building. Ashby looked out the window. Voss is going to have documentation requests by morning. Install. Install. She leaned against the wall. That's going to create a lot of disruption in the department. Yes. I still have to work there tomorrow. He glanced at her. Is that a concern? It's a reality. She crossed her arms, not defensively. She was cold, and the ICU corridor was always cold. I don't want to be the person who burned the department down on her first shift. You didn't burn anything down. They handed you a lit match and then complained about the heat. She almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost laugh. It came from somewhere she hadn't accessed in a while. You haven't changed, she said. I've changed plenty, he said. I'm just also still right. She looked at him. There was something she had been not saying since he'd walked through the ER doors. Something that lived in the gap between the person he'd known and the person she'd become in the 2 years between the army and this hospital corridor. I wasn't avoiding the work, she said. The nursing. I needed it to be smaller for a while. He nodded. He didn't say I understand or it makes sense, which she appreciated because those phrases were usually people performing understanding rather than doing it. He just nodded and let it be true. Daniel's going to want to meet with you again when he's more functional, he said. He's already asked his aide about your schedule. My schedule is whatever Pete Gallagher says it is. I suspect Pete Gallagher is going to be a lot more careful about how he handles your schedule going forward. Probably. She let that sit. How long are you in Millhaven? She asked. I'm here until he can be moved. 3-4 days, depending on what Marsh says. He paused. There's also the investigation into the training incident. That's going to take longer. She heard what he wasn't saying in that. Do you know what happened? Working theory is equipment failure on the detonation sequence. One of his team members didn't make it. He said it the way people said those things when they'd processed the grief in the operational compartment and were reporting the outcome. He's going to need to know that when he's awake enough to know it. She thought about Merritt looking at the ceiling in there, his body trying to repair itself from the inside. Has someone... His aide knows. We're waiting on his medical team to advise on timing. Don't wait too long, she said. Men like him, the not knowing is harder than the knowing. Ashby looked at her. Speak from experience? I speak from watching it, she said, about 12 times. He accepted that. The corridor was quiet except for the soft machinery of the ICU. Monitors, ventilators, the low percussion of medical equipment doing what it was built to do. I should finish my shift, she said. Go. She pushed off the wall and was 3 steps down the corridor when he spoke again. Carter. She turned. He looked at her steadily. For what it's worth, and I know you don't think it matters, so I'm saying it anyway, what you did today was the best emergency medicine I've seen in a clinical setting, and I've seen field medicine that would make most trauma surgeons lose sleep. She held that for a second. It did matter. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Get some sleep yourself, she said. You look terrible. Something crossed his face. Tired, real, something that had been carrying a very long day. I know, he said. She went back to the elevator and down to the ER. Tint. The last 40 minutes of her shift were administrative, completing charts, logging the drain output documentation, signing off on the web transfer note that needed her countersignature because she'd been the flagging nurse. Tanya was at the station when she got back, and she had 2 coffees and the expression of someone who had been waiting. How's he doing? Tanya asked, sliding a cup across the counter. Merritt, stable, better than expected. She took the coffee. Thank you. The whole department is talking about it. I figured. Not just the Merritt stuff. Tanya lowered her voice slightly, not from secrecy, but from a kind of care. The meeting with administration. Gallagher came back from that with a face I haven't seen on him in 3 years. Emily looked at her. What kind of face? The kind he gets when something structural is about to shift. Tanya wrapped both hands around her own cup. Voss and Stahl aren't talking to each other, which usually means they've been told not to talk to each other, which usually means lawyers. Emily nodded slowly. She'd expected this. She hadn't wanted it, but she'd expected it. How do you feel? Tanya asked. It was a direct question, asked by someone who had offered to be a friend at a plastic table over bad coffee at 11 in the morning and had meant it then and meant it now. Emily took it seriously. Tired, she said. Mostly tired. That's honest. I didn't come here for any of this. I came here to work. I know. Tanya paused. But the work you do, you can't separate it from what you are. The people who were trying to make you small, they weren't just being rude. They were actively making this department less safe. The 2 patients today. I know, Emily said. Both of them. I know, Tanya. Tanya stopped, looked at her. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Emily drank her coffee. It tasted like it had been in the pot for 3 hours, which it probably had. At 7:48, she signed out of the system, clipped her badge to her bag strap out of habit, and was pulling on her jacket in the locker room when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Millhaven area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Is this Emily Carter? The voice was female, professional, with a clipped quality that made her think communications training. Who's asking? My name is Diane Lourdes. I'm a producer with WMHV, Millhaven's regional news. I'm reaching out because we received information this afternoon about an incident at Redwood Regional Medical Center involving a military officer and a nurse with a special operations background, and I was hoping... Emily ended the call. She stood in the locker room for a moment, jacket half on, looking at the phone in her hand. Someone had talked. She didn't know who. There had been too many people in that room, too many personnel in that corridor, too many staff members watching the trauma bay when Ashby had said her rank out loud in front of everyone. It could have been anyone. The story was out. She put her phone in her pocket, finished putting on her jacket, and pushed through the locker room door. The ER floor was in its evening transition. Day shift handing off to nights, the controlled untidiness of 2 teams overlapping. She moved through it, headed for the exit. She was 20 feet from the ambulance bay doors when Gallagher intercepted her. He had his clipboard again, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at hers, and his face was doing the new thing, the thing she'd been cataloging all day, which was the expression of a man who was figuring out that he'd made categorical errors and was trying to decide what to do about them. Carter, wait. She stopped. He stood there for a moment. The media called the hospital's PR office 20 minutes ago, 3 different outlets. She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. I know, one of them called me directly. Gallagher's expression shifted into something she hadn't seen on him before, something that was closer to alarm than anything administrative. What did you tell them? Nothing. I ended the call. He exhaled. Good. Don't talk to anyone. Hospital Communications is handling the media requests. Pruitt wants you to know that the hospital will not be releasing your personal information or service record without your consent. Okay. The story's going to run regardless. We can't... He stopped, seemed to decide something. There were too many people in that bay. I know. Somebody in the military personnel leaked it, we think. She thought about the tactical sergeant who had been watching her in the bay, evaluating, not hostile. She thought about the look Ashby had given her in the ICU corridor. She thought about a lot of things in a very short sequence. She thought, Ashby leaked it, not carelessly, not accidentally, deliberately, and with full knowledge of what it would do. She pulled out her phone and called his number, which she had because she'd always had it, and it rang twice. Carter, he said. Did you call the press? A pause, just long enough to be an answer. I made a call, he said. Not to press. To someone who I knew would make a call to press. Her hand on the phone tightened. You didn't ask me. No. I told you I didn't want this done for me. I wanted it done correctly. I know what you said. His voice was steady. And I'm telling you, this is correct. What happened to you today will happen to the next person who walks into that department with a background they don't advertise if nobody outside those walls knows about it. The investigation Pruitt is running is internal. Internal investigations at hospitals. I know what internal investigations do, she said. Then you know why this needed to go outside. She stood in the corridor, 30 feet from the exit, holding a phone to her ear and looking at a wall that she wasn't seeing. She was thinking about Marcus Webb and his slow left pupil. She was thinking about the patient in Bay 2 with the dissection that nobody had wanted to call. She was thinking about what happened when the stories that needed to be told stayed contained within the walls that had something to lose from telling them. She was also thinking about the fact that tomorrow morning she was going to walk back into that department and every person in it would have read the story. Every attending, every nurse, every clerk at the intake desk. "You should have asked me," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have. I'm sorry." She believed him. That was the frustrating thing. She believed him, and she understood the decision, and she was still angry about it, and all three of those things were true simultaneously in a way she didn't have the bandwidth right now to fully process. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She hung up. Gallagher was still standing there. He had the look of a man who had heard approximately half of a phone call and had filled in the rest correctly. "It's going to be complicated in the morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "For what it's worth." He stopped. Started again. "I should have. When you came in this morning, I should have. I set the tone. With the way I talked to you, that's on me." It was halting and imperfect, and not quite an apology, but it was more real than she'd expected from him, and she gave it the weight it deserved. "We'll figure out the morning when it comes," she said. She walked out through the ambulance bay doors into the Millhaven evening, which was cooling fast and smelled like rain, and she was halfway to her car when her phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A text. From an internal hospital number she didn't recognize. She stopped walking and read it. "This is Dr. Fiona Marsh. I heard what happened today, both in the bay and in the conference room. I want you to know, I've been at this hospital for 11 years. What you did this afternoon was extraordinary. And if you're willing, I'd like to talk to you tomorrow about a different kind of role in this building. I think this place needs to change. I think you might be the reason it does." Emily read the message twice. Then she put the phone in her pocket and kept walking toward her car, and the rain that had been threatening all evening finally started to come down. And somewhere above the parking structure, the lights of the hospital threw yellow against the low clouds. And she thought about what Merritt had said. That's the kind of thing you remember. And thought about all the things she'd spent 2 years trying not to remember, and whether it was possible that this city, this building, this terrible first day was the thing that made her stop running from what she was. She got in her car and sat in the rain for a minute before she started the engine. Her phone lit up again. This time it was a number she recognized. A Millhaven prefix, the hospital's main line, routing through to the department. She answered. "Carter?" It was Gallagher. His voice had dropped into a register she hadn't heard from him yet, tight, stripped of the administrative buffer. "I need you to come back in." Her hand found the key but didn't turn it. "What happened?" "Colonel Merritt," Gallagher said. "He's crashing." She was back through the ambulance bay doors before Gallagher finished the sentence. The rain had started in earnest by the time she crossed the parking lot, and she was wet through the shoulders of her jacket by the time she hit the entrance, badge already in hand, not running, but moving with the particular velocity of someone who had learned that running announced panic, and panic was contagious, and contagion cost seconds. She badged through the ER, cut through the corridor toward the elevator bank, and was in the elevator before the doors had fully opened. 4th floor. ICU. The doors took 12 seconds to open, and she counted them. The corridor outside Merritt's room was different from how she'd left it 40 minutes ago. The tactical personnel were still there, but they'd moved, clustered near the door, not spread along the wall, which meant something had changed in the room, and they didn't have a protocol for it, and they were defaulting to proximity. The compact sergeant she'd noted earlier was on her phone, voice low and clipped, and she looked up when Emily came off the elevator. "What happened?" Emily asked, moving. He was talking to his aide. Sats dropped, the monitor alarmed. The sergeant's voice had the controlled flatness of someone managing fear through report. The night nurse came in and called it. Emily was already through the door. The night ICU nurse, a man in his 40s named Leon, who had the look of someone who had been expecting a quiet shift, was at the bedside managing a nasal cannula that had come loose. The monitor showed O2 sat 89 and dropping, heart rate 112, BP running high, 140 over 92. When did he desat? Emily asked. About 6 minutes ago. I was going to call the resident, but then, is he responsive? Yes, he's... Sir. She was at the bedside. Merritt's eyes were open and they were oriented. He knew where he was. He knew something was wrong, and he had the look of a man who had been in enough bad situations to know the difference between wrong and manageable and wrong and not. It's Carter, she said. I know. Raspy, labored. Something's wrong with the breathing. She put her hand on his chest, right side, felt the subcutaneous crepitus under her fingertips before she'd fully processed reaching for it, the soft crackle of air tracking under the skin that shouldn't be there. How long have the drains been in? She asked Leon. He came up from OR at 4, so 4 hours. She looked at the drain collection chamber. The output had changed. Thinner, less volume, which on its face looked better but wasn't, because she knew what she was feeling under her fingers, and she knew what that thin output meant when combined with dropping SATs and subcutaneous emphysema tracking up toward the neck. I need the resident in here now, she said. Not in 5 minutes. Now. Leon was already on the phone. She stayed at the bedside, tracking the monitor, keeping one hand on Merritt's arm. Not for any clinical reason, but because he was awake and scared in the controlled way that trained people were scared, which was a particular kind of alone. Is the drain blocked? He asked. Possibly. Don't talk. Save the work. He nodded, closed his mouth. She watched his accessory muscles, neck and shoulder, begin to engage with each breath, which was his body recruiting extra horsepower because the primary system was struggling. The resident arrived in 90 seconds, a third year named Okafor, the same one who'd been in the trauma bay earlier. He took in the scene fast. Subcutaneous emphysema tracking to the neck, Emily said. Drain output dropped in the last... Leon, when did the output change? Leon was reviewing the log. Last entry an hour ago showed appropriate serosanguinous. Before that, about 2 hours post-op, it started slowing. It wasn't flagged. A pause. The prior nurse documented it as expected post-op trend. Emily looked at the drain tubing. She didn't say anything about the prior documentation because it wouldn't help Merritt in the next 4 minutes, and that was the only clock that mattered right now. The tube may have migrated or clotted, she said to Okafor. He's got air tracking under the skin, SATs dropping, and he's working to breathe. If the drain's not functioning, he's reaccumulating, Okafor said. Yes. Okafor looked at the monitor, looked at Merritt. He was young enough that Emily could see the decision process moving across his face in real time. The assessment, the differential, the awareness that this was a post-op thoracic patient and anything he did needed to be cleared with the surgical team. I need to call Marsh, he said. Call her. But while you're calling her, I need a chest x-ray portable ordered, and I need the procedure card at the bedside. She held his gaze. Don't wait for the film to order the cart. He went for his phone. She did not take a breath in the way she wanted to, because that was for later. She looked at Merritt. She's good? He asked, meaning Marsh. She's very good, Emily said. You've already survived her once. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, the approximation of one. Marsh arrived from home in 19 minutes, which meant she'd been moving before she finished the call. She came through the ICU doors still buttoning her coat, took the X-ray image on the portable reader that Leon handed her before she reached the room, and looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. The anterior drain migrated, she said. It's not in position. Air's tracking back in. She came into the room, looked at the patient, looked at Emily. You called it. Leon caught the desat. You called the mechanism. Emily let that be. Marsh moved to the bedside. Colonel, I'm Dr. Marsh. We've met, but you were unconscious at the time, so I'll reintroduce. I need to reposition your chest drain. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it'll be fast. Merritt looked at her. Define fast. Faster than bleeding into your chest again, she said. Okay, he said. Do it. It was not fast in the way that word usually implied. It was fast in the way that technically complex procedures performed under pressure by someone highly competent were fast, deliberate and efficient, with none of the steps omitted, the pauses purposeful rather than hesitant. Emily assisted. Okafor held the light. Leon managed the monitoring documentation. When Marsh repositioned the drain and the output resumed, dark, significant, the appropriate evidence of a chest that was now draining what it needed to drain, Merritt's O2 sat began climbing within 90 seconds. 91, 93, 95. Merritt exhaled. The whole room exhaled with him. Better? Marsh asked. Yeah, he said, quieter than before. The effort of the last 20 minutes had cost him. Yeah, that's better. Marsh stripped her gloves and looked at Emily. How did you know to come back? Gallagher called me. I know Gallagher called you. How did you know what you were walking into? Emily looked at the drain output, at the monitor. I've seen drain complications in the field. The pattern, the dropping output combined with the SFCs, it fits a specific presentation. I wasn't certain. I thought it was worth coming back for. Marsh studied her for a moment with the same measuring quality she'd shown in the trauma bay. You thought it was worth coming back for, she repeated, like she was tasting the understatement of it. You drove back to the hospital in the rain on your own time on a hunch, on an informed suspicion. Right. Marsh looked at the monitor one more time. He would have been in significant distress within the hour. If it had gone undetected until morning rounds, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I'll want an updated film in 2 hours, and I'm coming in for rounds at 6 regardless of what Okafor's notes say. I'll make sure the night team knows, Leon said. Marsh nodded. She looked at Emily one more time, not the measuring look now, something different, something that had settled into a conclusion. Then she left. Okafor stood near the door with his tablet, completing the documentation. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said without looking up, When I was in the trauma bay today, I watched you decompress his chest. I've done it twice in simulation. I've seen it done once in practice. He paused. You did it the way people do things they've done 100 times. Emily was straightening the equipment cart. I've done it a few more than twice. In the field. Yes. He looked up then. He was maybe 28, with the tired eyes of someone in the third year of a residency that had given him more reality than he'd expected. I'm sorry about Voss, he said. And Stahl, the way they... He stopped. I should have said something when it was happening. I was in the bay this morning for the dissection call. She looked at him. I heard him shut you down, Okafor said. And I didn't say anything. I just charted. He looked at his tablet, not meeting her eyes. That's going to bother me for a while. She considered him. He was being honest in a way that cost him something, and she respected the cost. You're saying it now, she said, retroactively. Retroactive is better than never. She snapped the cart lock. Get some sleep after rounds. You look like you've been awake for 30 hours. He looked up. 26. Go eat something first. He almost smiled, left. Ashby was in the corridor when she came out. She'd known he would be. He'd probably arrived 2 minutes after her. She'd heard the elevator at some point during the drain repositioning but hadn't looked up. He was standing near the window she'd stood at earlier, and he had the look of a man who had been processing something while he waited. Marsh told me, he said as she came alongside him, before she left. He's stable. I know. He looked out the window. The rain had intensified, and the parking structure lights were doing something fragmented through the water on the glass. This is twice in one day. The drain complication is a known post-op risk. It wasn't a failure of, I'm not assigning blame, he said. I'm saying it's twice in one day that you were the reason he didn't die. He paused. And that I put you in an impossible position with the press. She leaned against the wall. Her jacket was still damp at the shoulders. She was tired in the way she hadn't been tired in a while. Not the ordinary tired of a long shift, but the particular depletion of a day that had asked for everything at once. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter, she said. It does. I'll deal with it. That's all you're going to say about it. What do you want me to say? That you were wrong? You were. That you also probably made it harder for the hospital to bury the investigation? Yes. Both things are true, and I can't unknow either one. She looked at him. You have a habit of making the right call for the wrong reason. He looked at her. Is that what I did? You did it to protect me. That was the wrong reason. The right reason was the one you explained, that's systemic accountability. If you'd led with the second one, I might have agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Noted, he said, for future reference. Noted, he said again, and this time something in it was closer to the old shorthand they'd had. Two people who had worked in proximity under high stakes long enough to develop an economy of communication that skipped the social scaffolding. She pushed off the wall. I'm going to go talk to Leon about the night protocol for Merritt, and then I'm going home. It's 9:40. I know what time it is. He let her go. She was at the nursing station when he said her name one more time, and she turned. The press story, he said. WMHV is running it at 6 a.m. I know what's in it. They didn't go with the angle I'd hoped for. She felt something shift in her chest. What angle did they go with? The hospital angle, Sam, he said. Not just your service record. They have the names of the physicians involved. Voss, Stahl. He paused. And they have the HR complaint history. Apparently, he stopped, started more carefully. Apparently, you're not the first nurse who's filed concerns about Voss's conduct. She stood very still. How many? The reporter found 3 prior complaints over 5 years, all resolved internally. All, he met her eyes, all resolved in Voss's favor. She stood there for a moment, in the quiet corridor with the rain against the glass, and she thought about the folder on Voss's desk that morning, the way he'd known exactly what he was doing, the way he'd said this only needs to happen once, with the confidence of a man who had said it before and had been proven right. Were any of those nurses still here? She asked. One transferred, one resigned, one... Ashby's expression did something careful. One took a leave of absence about 8 months ago that she hasn't come back from. The weight of that was specific and heavy, not abstract, a person. She turned and went to find Leon. She was in her car by 10:15. She did not go straight home. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the rain on the roof and her phone in her hand, and she read everything that the WMHV reporter had sent her. A second message this time, a formal media inquiry with the specific questions they intended to publish responses to, sent to the hospital's PR office with her name CC'd because someone in PR had thought she had a right to know, which was the first genuinely good instinct she'd seen from anyone in hospital administration all day. The questions were detailed. They were about her service record, about the events in the ER, about the specific patients, Webb and the dissection case and Merritt, and about the prior HR complaints against Voss. The reporter, whose name was Diane Lord, and who was evidently better than Emily had initially given her credit for, had done real work, the kind that took sources and time and the willingness to follow a thread past the comfortable part. Emily read every question. Then she sent a single text to a number she looked up from the missed call log. I'll talk to you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., not on hospital property. Lordu replied in 4 minutes. Thank you. I'll send you an address. Emily put the phone down, started the car, and drove home through the rain. The next morning came in gray and wet and relentless. She arrived at the coffee shop Lord had specified at 7:50, ordered something black, and sat at a table near the back that faced the door. Lord arrived at 7:58, a woman in her late 30s with the alert quality of someone who ran on information and had learned to read rooms. She sat down without preamble and put a recorder on the table. May I? She asked. Yes, Emily said. They talked for 70 minutes. Emily was careful, and she was honest, and she was specific. She did not perform outrage. She described what had happened in clinical terms where clinical terms were accurate and in plain language where they were not. She talked about Webb's pupil and the dissection call and the conference room, and she talked about what Ashby had told her about the prior complaints, which she framed as what she'd been told rather than what she could verify herself. When Lord asked about her service record, Emily answered the questions that were relevant to the clinical events and declined the ones that weren't. She said clearly, "I'm not telling this story because I want recognition. I'm telling it because 3 complaints against the same physician were buried by internal process, and I want people to understand what that costs." Lord clicked off the recorder at 9:10. "One more question, off the record." Emily looked at her. "Are you going back?" Lord asked. "To that hospital." Emily picked up her coffee. "I'm on shift at 2, she said. Lord looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. Something in her expression was close to respect. "Okay." Thus, the story went live on the WMHV digital platform at 11:30 a.m., an hour and a half before Emily's shift started. By the time she walked into Redwood Regional at 1:50, it had been shared 400 times, and 2 larger regional outlets had picked it up. The PR office had issued a statement that was careful and legally pre-approved and said nothing of substance, which was consistent with what PR offices did. Pruitt had sent an internal memo to department heads that she saw excerpted in a screenshot on her phone, which said the hospital was cooperating fully with the HR investigation and that staff were reminded of the confidentiality requirements around ongoing personnel matters. The ER floor, when she walked onto it, was the same floor it had been yesterday. Same layout, same sounds, same smell of antiseptic and recycled air. But the people on it were different in the specific way that people were different after a story had run. They had knowledge now that rearranged what they saw when they looked at her. Tanya was at the station. She handed Emily a badge and a chart simultaneously. "Bay 4, she said. 68-year-old male, shortness of breath, history of CHF. He's been waiting 20 minutes and he's anxious." "Okay," Emily said, clipped the badge, took the chart, and moved. She heard someone say her name behind her as she walked, not to her, to someone else, in the tone of people orienting themselves in a new geography, and she did not turn around. Bayfour was a small man in a paper gown with the frightened eyes of someone whose body had been frightening him for years, and had stopped surprising him, but had not stopped scaring him. She introduced herself, sat on the rolling stool to put herself at his eye level, and asked him what was happening. He told her. She listened, not waiting for him to finish so she could start, but actually listening, the way she'd been taught, the way she'd refined over 6 years in environments where missing a detail cost more than listening carefully did. This was the work. This was what she'd come here for. She didn't look up when she heard Voss's voice in the corridor outside the bay. She heard it, registered it, and kept her focus on the man in front of her. Voss was not in the department when she came out of Bay 4 40 minutes later. She found this out from Gallagher, who had the expression of a man managing information carefully. "He's been asked to take administrative leave," Gallagher said, voice low, facing the supply shelf like they were discussing inventory. "Effective this morning, pending the HR investigation." She absorbed this. Who told him? Pruitt, and apparently the department chief called him at 7 a.m. The story ran and the department chief had already gotten 3 calls from board members by 8. And Stahl? Still on shift. He's cooperating with the investigation. He submitted a written statement this morning. Gallagher paused. "I don't know what's in it." She didn't either. She thought about what cooperation looked like for a man like Stahl, whether it was genuine accountability or the kind of strategic admission that preserved the most important things. She thought she probably wouldn't know for a while. "Who's covering trauma attending?" she asked. "Rosario's taking the department for now. She volunteered." Emily nodded. That tracked with what she knew of Rosario. She went back to work. The afternoon moved through its patients. A pediatric case with a complicated family, a young woman with an allergic reaction that escalated faster than the triage assessment had predicted, a construction injury that needed ortho consult, a teenager in the waiting room who had been there for 3 hours with an ankle fracture and who had not complained once, which Emily noticed when she passed the waiting area and went back to ask. "Why didn't you tell the intake nurse it was getting worse?" she asked the teenager, a 15-year-old girl with her mother who had the wary look of a family that had learned not to ask for too much. "I didn't want to bother anyone," the girl said. Emily looked at her. Thought about a lot of things. You're not bothering anyone, she said. That's what we're here for. She fast-tracked the ankle to imaging. At 4:15, Fiona Marsh appeared in the ER, not for a consult. Emily could tell the difference. She was in street clothes under a white coat, which meant she'd come from a meeting, and she had the focused look of someone who'd made a decision and was following through on it. Do you have a minute? Marsh asked. They found the break room empty. Marsh sat down across from her and put both hands flat on the table, which was the posture of someone presenting something rather than asking for something. I sent you a text last night, Marsh said. I got it. I meant it. She paused. I've been talking to Pruitt since 7 this morning. With the Voss situation, the investigation, the leave, the board involvement, there's going to be a significant restructuring of how the trauma and ER division operates. He's asked me to help design an oversight protocol. She looked at Emily directly. I want you involved in that. Emily looked at her. I've been here 2 days. I know. I'm a nurse. I know that too. Marcia's voice didn't shift. She wasn't performing patience, she was just stating things as she saw them. I've been a surgeon in this hospital for 11 years. In 11 years, I've seen the ER run through 4 trauma attending chiefs, 2 major accreditation reviews, 1 malpractice settlement that cost this institution $3 million, and approximately 200 instances of exactly what happened to you yesterday. A clinician with real knowledge getting talked over by someone with the authority to do it. She stopped. I've also, in 11 years, seen 1 person decompress a tension pneumothorax in a trauma bay with the speed and accuracy you showed yesterday, and then quietly manage a drain complication on her own time at 10 p.m., and then come back for a full shift the next morning and take a CHF patient in Bay 4 without showing any of it. Emily said nothing. I'm not asking you to take a role you don't want, Marsh said. I'm asking you if you'd be willing to be part of a conversation about how this department could work better. That's all. Emily looked at the table for a moment, looked up. Is this Ashby's idea? It is not Ashby's idea, Marsh said, and there was a slight edge to it. Not unfriendly, just precise. I don't take departmental initiatives from military officers. I take them from patients who nearly died twice in 18 hours. Fair enough. Let me think about it, Emily said. That's all I'm asking. Marsh left. Emily sat in the break room for the remaining 4 minutes of what was technically her break, and she thought about the textbook on her nightstand at home that she'd been reading for the certification exam she'd been putting off for 8 months, and about the 15-year-old girl with the ankle who hadn't wanted to bother anyone, and about the nurse who'd taken a leave of absence 8 months ago and hadn't come back. She thought about what staying meant, not just working the shift but staying, committing to this place and its problems and its possibility in a way that couldn't be undone. She went back to the floor. Shit. At 5:40, Stahl found her in the corridor outside Bay 6. She saw him coming and she kept moving. She was carrying a specimen to the lab satellite station, and she wasn't going to stop for him. But she wasn't going to make a production of not stopping either. He fell into step beside her. Carter. Dr. Stahl. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him assembling something. I submitted a statement to HR this morning, he said. Gallagher mentioned. I told them... He stopped, started differently. I told them that my management of the web case was inadequate given the information I had available, and that my response to your clinical observation was inappropriate. She walked. He kept pace. I'm not telling you because I expect something, he said. I know this doesn't fix anything. She stopped at the lab satellite window, logged the specimen, signed the chain form. She didn't respond immediately because she was completing the task she was completing, and that was not dismissal of him. It was just the job. When she was done, she turned. He looked worse than he had yesterday. Not dramatically. He was composed, dressed appropriately, functionally present. But there were the signs that a person showed when they'd done real accounting of something and found the numbers bad. She recognized it because she'd done the same accounting herself, in different contexts, and she knew what it cost. I'll take it as it is, she said. He nodded. That's fair. She went back to her corridor. He went a different direction. Rosario was at the nursing station when Emily arrived and met her eyes over the counter with an expression that communicated several things at once. It landed warmly. Emily let it. "You doing okay?" Rosario asked. "Working on it," Emily said. "That's the honest answer," Rosario said, and handed her a chart. Merritt's aide came down from the ICU at 6:20. He was a young staff sergeant named Briggs, early 20s, with the angular efficiency of someone who'd trained hard and was good at what he did. He found Emily at the nursing station and waited until she was between tasks. "Ma'am, Colonel Merritt asked me to bring you something." He handed her an envelope. Heavy paper, institutional, the kind that came from the administrative offices of organizations that still used institutional paper. Her name on the front in handwriting that was controlled and slightly unsteady, which meant he'd written it himself probably that morning when his hands were still recovering from everything yesterday had done to them. She opened it. Inside was a card. Plain, no design. 2 lines. "I know what you gave up to do this work. It wasn't nothing, neither is this." Underneath, DM. She stood at the nursing station and read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in the pocket of her scrubs, and went back to the board. Tanya appeared at her elbow 60 seconds later. "What was in the envelope?" "None of your business," Emily said. "Was it nice?" Tanya. "I'll take that as yes." Tanya handed her a coffee. "Rosario wants to know if you're available for a quick debrief at change of shift." "About what?" "About the new intake protocol she's drafting. She wants nursing input before she presents it to Pruitt." Tanya paused. "She specifically asked for you." Emily held the coffee. "Yeah," she said. "Tell her yes." The debrief ran until 7:45. Rosario had drafted 4 pages of protocol revision. Triage communication standards, escalation pathways, documentation requirements for flagged observations that bypassed the problem that had nearly killed Webb. It was specific and well-constructed and had clearly been developing in her head for longer than the 24 hours since the crisis. Emily read it, flagged 2 areas where the language was vague enough to be circumvented by someone who wanted to circumvent it, and suggested 3 additions based on what she'd seen in forward-deployed triage environments where the chains were shorter and the margins were thinner. Rosario incorporated everything in real time, typing without argument. When they were done, she looked at Emily across the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you were in the field, in those environments, was there a protocol, or was it judgment?" Emily thought about it. "Both," she said. "The protocol told you what to do when there was time to do it. The judgment told you what to do when there wasn't." She paused. "The good environments made room for both." Rosario nodded slowly. "That's what I'm trying to build." "I know," Emily said. "I can see it." They finished at 7:50, and Emily was gathering her things when Rosario said, "Marsh talked to me." Emily stilled. "She told me what she offered you," Rosario said. "I want you to know. That's not a political move on her part. Marsh doesn't do political. She does what she thinks needs doing." A pause. "She's right about what this department needs." Emily put on her jacket. "I'll think about it," she said, and this time she meant it differently than she'd meant it before. She was in her car by 8:15 and she sat for a moment before starting the engine. The rain had stopped. The parking lot had that specific quality of a wet evening after weather, where the lights from the building caught the surface of the water on the asphalt and multiplied. Her phone lit up. Ashby. She answered before she'd decided to. "The board met this afternoon," he said, without preamble, because he knew she wanted information more than she wanted a greeting. "Emergency session. Voss's leave has been formalized pending the investigation outcome. They've also retained an external HR firm to review all prior complaints, not just the ones against Voss." "All prior complaints," she said. "Going back how far?" 5 years minimum, possibly further." She absorbed this. The woman who'd taken leave 8 months ago, the one who'd resigned, the one who'd transferred to somewhere where she didn't have to be in the same building as the thing that had been done to her. "There's something else," Ashby said. She waited. "The investigation into the training accident, the one that put Merritt in that hospital, preliminary findings indicate it wasn't equipment failure." He paused. They're looking at deliberate tampering. The air in the car changed. Tampering by whom? She asked. That's what they're investigating, but the preliminary scope includes personnel with access to the training site. He stopped. Carter, the convoy that came to your hospital yesterday, they weren't just bringing Merritt to the nearest trauma center. She was very still. They brought him to Millhaven specifically, he said, because Millhaven was on a pre-approved medical routing list, because it was the safest option given the security profile of the situation. Another pause. But someone had access to that routing list, and now someone knows exactly which hospital a critically wounded special operations officer was taken to. She thought about the tactical sergeant in the corridor, the perimeter that wasn't a perimeter, the personnel who'd stayed through the night. You think someone's going to come here, she said. I think we can't rule it out, he said, which is why I need to tell you. The security posture at the hospital is changing tonight. More personnel, different protocols. He paused one more time. And I need to tell you, because you're going to walk back in there tomorrow morning, and you deserve to know what you're walking into. She looked at the building through the windshield. The lights were still on in the ICU on the 4th floor. Merritt was up there in a hospital bed with 2 chest tubes and a drain that had been repositioned once already, with the knowledge that someone on his team hadn't made it, and with the possibility, still being investigated, still unconfirmed, but real enough to change security postures, that whoever had done this wasn't finished. She started the car. I'll be there at 6, she said. Carter. I'll be there at 6, she said again. She pulled out of the parking lot, and as she turned onto the street, her headlights swept across a dark sedan parked at the far edge of the lot. Engine running, no occupants visible through the tinted glass, positioned at an angle that gave it a direct sight line to the hospital's main entrance. She noted the plate number in the way she'd been trained to note things. Automatically, completely, without giving any outward sign that she'd noticed at all. Then she drove, watching her mirrors all the way home. She memorized the plate number by repeating it 4 times in her head during the first stoplight, then wrote it on the inside of her wrist with the pen she kept in the cup holder. Old habit, the kind that looked strange to people who hadn't learned it for a reason. When she got home, she texted it to Ashby with 3 words, parking lot, watching. He replied in under 2 minutes. Got it. Don't come in early. Wait for my call. She put the phone on the kitchen counter and stood in her apartment and looked at the wall for about 30 seconds, which was her version of processing. Then she made food, not because she was hungry, but because she'd learned that a body running on half a granola bar and 3 coffees made worse decisions, and tomorrow felt like a day that would require good ones. She ate. She read the 4 pages of Rosario's protocol draft, which she'd photographed with her phone before leaving the debrief. She made 3 more notes in the margins. She set her alarm for 5:15 and went to sleep with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned that rest was a tactical resource, not a reward. Ashby called at 5:04. The vehicle is registered to a logistics company out of state. Shell entity. It took the security team about 6 hours to find what's underneath it, which means whoever set it up knew what they were doing. He paused. The vehicle was gone by midnight. We don't know where. So they know they were noticed, or they had what they came for and left. Another pause. Either way, we've added personnel inside the building, 2 in plain clothes on the 4th floor. The security posture is different than it was yesterday. Merritt knows? He was briefed at 0400. He took it about how you'd expect. She thought about Merritt in that bed, the controlled way he'd process things, the card in her pocket. He's going to try to be more functional than he is. Already happening. I've asked his aide to manage it. Good luck to Briggs, she said. Something in Ashby's voice shifted. Not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. Yeah. She got dressed. She drove to the hospital in the early morning dark and kept her mirrors checked the whole way, and nothing followed her, and she wasn't entirely sure if that was reassurance or just the absence of visible threat, which were different things. The hospital at 6 a.m. was a different animal than the hospital at 7. Quieter in the corridors, the night staff finishing their runs with the specific fatigue of people who'd held the line through the hours when everything felt more fragile. Emily badged in, changed, and went to the ICU first. Merritt was awake. He'd been awake for a while, she could tell. The look of someone who'd moved past the initial return of consciousness into the frustration of a body that wouldn't cooperate with what the mind wanted. He had the bed elevated, a tablet propped on his lap that he probably wasn't supposed to have, and Briggs sitting in the corner with the look of a man losing a slow argument. "Put the tablet away," she said, coming through the door. He looked at her. "Good morning." "It will be if you put the tablet away." He looked at Briggs, who looked back at him with profound vindication. He put the tablet face down on the blanket, which was not the same as putting it away, but she let it go. She checked his drain, his vitals, the output numbers from overnight. Everything was moving in the right direction. Not fast, not dramatically, but consistently, which was what post-op thoracic recovery looked like when it was going correctly. "You look better," she said. "I feel like I've been hit by something large." "You have been. Your body's doing the work. Let it." He looked at her steadily. "Ashby told me about the vehicle." "I figured." "You're not worried." "I'm appropriately cautious," she said. "It's different." He accepted that distinction. "They're going to find who did it," he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't bravado. It was the specific certainty of a man who had spent his career in the machinery of accountability and knew what it looked like when it engaged fully. "I know," she said. "It won't bring Reyes back." He said it evenly, but not without weight. The name of the team member who hadn't made it. First time she'd heard it. "But it'll matter for what comes after." She looked at him. "Tell me about Reyes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Nobody had asked him that. She could see it. They'd briefed him and managed him and protected him, but nobody had just asked. He told her. Not everything, not for long. His chest wouldn't allow long, and the grief was still too fresh to be fully linguistic. But he told her enough. A name, a history, a description of a kind of competence that was also a kind of person. She listened in the way she'd listened to the CHF patient yesterday, actually present, not waiting for her turn. When he was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you for asking." "Of course," she said. She left him to rest and went down to the ER. The story had grown overnight. 2 national news aggregators had picked up the WMHV piece. The hospital's social media accounts had comments in the hundreds. Pruitt's office had released a second statement, more specific than the first, that acknowledged the HR investigation, confirmed Voss's administrative leave, and used the phrase commitment to a culture of safety 3 times in 4 paragraphs, which was what legal-approved statements looked like. None of this was on the ER floor. The floor was patients and charts, and the work that didn't pause for institutional crisis management. Emily plugged in at the nursing station at 6:40, took her assignment from the night nurse doing handoff, and started moving. Rosario arrived at 7 and stopped at the station long enough to say, "The protocol draft went to Pruitt last night. He wants a meeting at noon." "I'm on shift until 3, Emily said. "I told him noon worked for the nursing lead." Rosario looked at her with the kind of directness that didn't require elaboration. "You're the nursing lead on this, if you want to be." Emily looked at her board. "Let me get through morning rounds." "That's a yes," Rosario said, and went to her first patient. Tanya appeared with coffee at 7:15, which Emily was beginning to understand was simply a thing that happened now, a small daily act of functional friendship that didn't require acknowledgement beyond receiving it. "Voss is being asked to surrender his department access card," Tanya said, handing over the cup. "I heard it from Gallagher's assistant." "When?" "This morning. Apparently the external HR firm moved faster than anyone expected." Emily drank the coffee. "Good. In Stahl's written statement, Gallagher told me it included an acknowledgement that he'd been made aware of concerns about Voss's conduct previously and hadn't reported them." She stopped. "Which means," Tanya said quietly, "he knew. And he covered for it." Emily set the cup down. She thought about the woman who hadn't come back from leave. She thought about the two who'd left. She thought about what it cost a person to walk into a building every day that told them, in small, consistent ways, that they were less than what they knew themselves to be. "What happens to Stahl?" she asked. "The external firm will determine that." Tanya paused. But Pruitt told the department chief this morning that the threshold for action is lower than it's historically been at this hospital. The board made that clear. Emily picked her coffee back up. "It should have always been lower." "Yes," Tanya said simply. "It should have." Gate. The noon meeting happened in the same conference room where everything had unfolded 2 days ago. Emily sat at the table with Rosario and Marsh, facing Pruitt and a woman from the external HR firm named Sandra Osei, who had the precise, unhurried quality of someone who had done this work long enough to know that speed served no one in cases like this. Pruitt opened by summarizing where the investigation stood, which Emily already knew most of from the various channels that information had been moving through. What she didn't know, and learned in the next 4 minutes, was the full scope. 5 complaints against Voss over 6 years. Not 3. 5. 2 that predated the formal HR system's current documentation structure and had been handled by the prior department chief through conversations that left no written record. A method that was, Osei noted, in the flat tone of someone stating a legal and ethical problem, not compliant with current standards and not something that would be permitted going forward. The woman on leave, her name was Kelly Marsh, thus no relation to Fiona, and she had been a charge nurse with 8 years of seniority who had filed a formal complaint 18 months ago alleging systematic undermining of her clinical authority by Voss, including 2 documented incidents where he had overridden her patient safety flags in front of junior staff. The complaint had been reviewed internally. It had been found unsubstantiated. 8 months later, she'd taken leave. She hadn't come back because the determination had told her something about what the building thought of her, and she'd believed it, and that was the part that sat in Emily's chest like something heavier than anger. "What happens to Kelly Marsh's record?" Emily asked. Osei looked at her. "The prior determination is under review. If the evidence supports reversal, and preliminary indication is that it does, her HR file will be corrected and she'll be contacted directly." "Will she be offered her position back?" "That will be part of the outreach, yes." Emily thought about whether Kelly Marsh would want it back. She thought that was Kelly Marsh's decision to make, and that the important thing was that it be a real decision, with real information, rather than the enforced one she'd been handed 18 months ago. "Okay," she said. Pruitt looked at her across the table. He had the look of a man who had been running a building that he thought he understood and had discovered in the last 48 hours that he didn't, and was trying to figure out how to lead through that discovery without making it about himself. "Nurse Carter," he said, "I want to formally acknowledge, on behalf of this institution, that what you experienced on your first shift here was unacceptable. The patients who were at risk as a result of it compound that significantly." He paused. "I also want to acknowledge that you handled it with a degree of professionalism that this hospital did not deserve from you on day 1. She looked at him steadily. She wasn't going to perform false modesty about that, and she wasn't going to perform magnanimity either. "I appreciate that," she said. "What I'd ask is that the acknowledgement shows up in structure, not just in this room." "That's why we're here," he said. "Then let's talk about the protocol," she said, and looked at Rosario. Rosario opened her folder. Pata. The meeting ran 90 minutes and produced something concrete, which was the only kind of outcome Emily had patience for. A revised escalation pathway with nursing co-authority on flagged patient safety observations. A documentation requirement that created a time-stamped record whenever a clinical flag was overridden, with mandatory attending justification in writing. An anonymous reporting channel that went to the external firm rather than internal HR. And a nursing advisory position, newly created, reporting to the department chief, that would sit on the patient safety committee with voting weight. Pruitt offered Emily the advisory position in the room, in front of everyone. She looked at Marsh, who had said nothing during the protocol discussion, except for 3 precise additions that strengthened it structurally. Marsh looked back at her with the expression of a person who had done what she could do and was now watching someone else make their own decision. She thought about the 15-year-old girl who hadn't wanted to bother anyone. She thought about Webb's pupil, slow by half a second, the thing that was easy to miss. She thought about what it meant to be the person who caught it, and whether that was a thing she was willing to keep being in a place that would now, structurally, actually let her. Yes, she said. But Voss surrendered his access card at 2:15 p.m. She didn't see it happen. She was in Bay 3 with a post-seizure patient when it occurred, but she heard about it from 3 different people within the following hour, which told her how much it had reverberated through the building. He had come in at the request of Pruitt's office, accompanied by a representative from the HR firm, and had been escorted to the administrative offices and then out. His personal items from the office were to be collected by a designated time. His parking privileges were suspended. The formal investigation would determine what came after that. She thought about him in that office with the folder on his desk, the careful language, the "this only needs to happen once." She thought about the 6 years of people who had come before her and the weight of what that represented. And she let herself feel the full shape of it. Not satisfaction exactly, because satisfaction implied something clean, and this wasn't clean. It was overdue and incomplete, and the people it had cost the most weren't in this building to see it. But it was real, and real mattered. Stahl was still in the department. He would face the investigation's findings when they came, which Ose had indicated would take 4 to 6 weeks. His statement had been cooperative enough to complicate the outcome. It wasn't an exoneration, and it wasn't a termination. It was something in the middle that would take time to resolve, which was how these things usually went. She was at peace with that, because she was at peace with process when the process was actually running. At 3:10, she was completing her final chart of the shift when Gallagher appeared at the station. He had his clipboard as always, but he held it differently now. Looser, less like a shield. "End of shift," he said. "I know." He stood there for a moment. "The advisory position. Pruitt's office sent the formal letter to my desk for you." He slid an envelope across the counter. "Congratulations is a weird thing to say given everything, so I'll just—" "Here." She picked it up. "Thank you, Pete." He blinked. First time she'd used his first name. He hadn't expected it, and it landed somewhere visible on his face before he controlled it. "Yeah," he said. "See you tomorrow." She put the envelope in her bag and finished the chart. Ashby found her in the parking lot. He was leaning against a vehicle she didn't recognize, something the security detail was using, nondescript and dark, with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was not a uniform, which meant this was not an official visit. The evening was cool and clear, the rain from the night before entirely gone, the sky doing something blue and sharp over the parking structure. "The vehicle from last night," he said when she reached him. "They traced it. The investigation team made an arrest at 0900. She stopped. "Who?" "A contractor. Former military, 2 years removed. He was hired externally. Whoever planned the training accident used enough insulation that it'll take time to get to the top, but they have the thread now and they're pulling it." He paused. "Merritt is being transferred to a secure medical facility tomorrow morning, more appropriate for what the recovery is going to need." She nodded. She'd known this was coming. "Is he okay with the transfer?" "He asked me to make sure someone told you thank you before he left." Ashby paused. "I told him you didn't need to hear it." She looked at him. "I told him," he said, "that you'd rather know he was going to be okay." "That's accurate," she said. "He said he knows. And to tell you anyway." Ashby reached into his pocket and held out something. A patch, small, fabric, the kind worn on a uniform sleeve. She took it. A unit insignia she recognized, even after 2 years. "He wanted you to have it," Ashby said. "He said, and I'm quoting, that it was the least he could do for someone who'd kept him alive twice in the same day." She held the patch, looked at it for a moment. It was worn at the edges, not new. The real thing, not a replica. The kind of thing a person kept. She put it in her jacket pocket, next to the card he'd written. "How are you?" Ashby asked. Just like that, plain. She thought about it seriously. "I'm okay," she said. "Not in the performed way. Actually, okay." "Good." "You should have asked me before the press call," she said one more time, because it needed to be said a final time, and then she was done with it. "I know," he said. And you were right about why it needed to happen anyway. I know I was, she said. That's the complicated part. Something crossed his face, the closest thing to warmth she'd seen from him that wasn't being managed for someone else's benefit. You're going to be good here, he said. This place is going to be better for having you in it. She looked at the building, the lights coming on in the windows as the evening set in. The ICU floor, fourth window from the left, where a room was being cleared for a patient who was going to survive. The ER entrance, the glass doors, the place where people came when things had gone wrong and needed someone to be right. I hope so, she said. That's the whole point. He straightened. They stood for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who had been through significant things together and didn't need to perform the significance. Take care of yourself, Carter. You too, General. He got in the vehicle. She watched it pull out of the lot and turn onto the street, and then she walked to her own car and got in and sat for a moment before she started it. She thought about the first time she'd driven out of here, last night, in the rain, watching her mirrors, carrying the weight of a day that had asked more than she'd expected to give on a first shift in a new building. She thought about how much had been different about her and how much had been the same, and which of those things were going to matter going forward. She was 31 years old. She had spent 6 years learning how to keep people alive in the worst possible conditions, and 2 years finding a quieter way to do the same thing, and one day having the quieter way crash into the other and expose everything she'd been carrying. She had never wanted to be a story. She had wanted to do the work. But she understood now. In a way she hadn't the morning before when she'd walked in with a canvas bag and nobody looked twice, that sometimes the work required you to be visible. Sometimes staying invisible was its own form of abandonment, of the people who came after you, of the ones who hadn't been able to stay, of the 15-year-old in the waiting room who didn't want to bother anyone because no one had ever shown her that she was worth the bother. The quietest person in the room was not always the safest. Sometimes the safest thing was to speak, and to keep speaking, and to not stop until the room changed around you. She had not asked for any of what had happened. She had not manufactured a crisis or sought a platform or wanted any of the visibility that was now attached to her name. She had walked into a building and done her job and refused to do it smaller than it needed to be done, and the refusal itself had been the act. That was the thing nobody told you about strength. It wasn't a thing you performed or announced. It was a thing you maintained, day after day, in the small decisions, in the moments when it would be easier to let something go, and you didn't. It accumulated in you without your knowing it, and then one day when something tested it, you found out how much you'd built, and you used it. She started the car. She was on shift at 6 a.m. There was a protocol to implement, and a committee seat to fill, and an ER department that was in the process of becoming something better than what it had been, imperfectly and fitfully, and with a lot of work still ahead of it. There were patients who would come through those doors tomorrow who deserved a building that had done that work. She pulled out of the lot and drove home through the clear evening, and the city was ordinary and lit and moving, and she was part of it. Not invisible, not a symbol, not a story. Just a nurse going home after a shift, carrying everything she was, ready to come back. That was enough. That had always been enough. And now, finally, the building knew it too.